Yeah. Okay. So, what we wanted to cover in this webinar are basically, two things. So, if you're an aspiring migrant who's in another country, and you're thinking of moving to another country for work, what is that one specific strategy that you can apply? So that's something that Chiara will share. The other thing is, once you've decided to make your move, what are the mistakes to avoid and what is it that you would wish you knew before living and moving to another country? And hopefully this one will be covered by me, and hopefully this would also answer some of your questions, Thea, especially the one specific to language, right? Because I heard you mention earlier, what would it be like for a non-native speaker also to live in another country. So thank you for giving us your 40 minutes. And we actually like that, it's just less participants because it also feels more intimate and we can really have this conversation. So at the end of the webinar as well, or before the end, we can also have some time to answer some other questions na hindi or we will not cover during our conversation. But first, to briefly introduce myself. So I'm Tin Mariano. I'm a coach and entrepreneur based in Brussels, Belgium. I moved here 5 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic. And I use my coaching and content creation to help migrant professionals survive and thrive in an international environment. Oh, yeah, I forgot to switch to the next screen. But basically, this is where you can find me if you're interested to know more. I also wrote an ebook titled Survive and Thrive, and it contains all the lessons learned I gained from my 5 years experience as a migrant. And I will also talk a bit more about this ebook later. Now I'll turn it over to Chara for her to also introduce herself.
Cool. Thanks, Tin. It's crazy that we're here in this webinar, both as entrepreneurs, because Tin and I met, I think 2020, and she
Mhm.
just randomly found a blog post of mine talking about the overseas employment certificate, which
That's
is a
true.
nightmare, which is a
Yeah.
nightmare, making it harder for Filipinos to get a job abroad. I think Thea knows because she's in Thailand. But yeah, super happy to be here. My name is Chiara. I'm a Filipino. I was a former product manager, used to work in Forto, which is a tech unicorn here in Germany. I moved to Germany in 2019. Now I'm a permanent resident. Um, yeah, so I've always believed that one of the bravest and hardest things anyone can do in their life is decide to move and live abroad. And when I decided to do it, I tried to look for resources to help me do this. And I'm like, why isn't there more support? Like, there's a lot of support for visa and paperwork, but in my opinion, the hardest and most important part is the job search. Because if you have an offer, everything else works itself out. But without a job offer, nothing works. Well, except if you're going to the studies route, which Thea is doing. But yeah. Yeah, so last year I quit my job and went full time on my business, helping skilled immigrants land a job in Germany. I've always joked that my best skill is job searching and my worst skill is job staying. But since starting this business, I've found that it's freaking hard because job searching is hard enough, but job searching as an immigrant, like that is job searching on hard mode. Yeah, so it's freaking hard, but I've never done anything more fulfilling. So, yeah, happy to be here.
So, Chara, because you mentioned earlier that you moved to Germany, right? And that's for work. So, how was it like for you looking for a job from the Philippines to Germany? And if I remember correctly from our conversations, you didn't know anyone in that country.
Yes. That's exactly right. So yeah, it was 2019. I I've done all my work in the Philippines and in the US. So I've done a lot of traveling in Asia and in the US, which I think is typical for Filipinos. You know, the Filipino dream is to move to America. Uh, yeah, at that point, never been to Germany, never been to Europe, didn't know anyone in Europe. So, like, no credibility. I studied in UP, which is like the number one university in the Philippines. Sorry if others disagree, but it's a fact. But no one knows what UP is in Germany. So, yeah, moving here, no network, no credibility, nothing. Um, so yeah, when I decided to move to Germany, I was very aware that the odds were against me. I wasn't in Germany, I didn't speak German, and to be honest, I wasn't even the best or most experienced product manager. So why the heck would anyone hire me?
So
So, go
what
ahead.
worked for you then? What kind of strategy did you apply?
Yes, good question, which we planted. Uh, so as a side story, when I was 23, I decided to start my first business. It was a marketing consulting business, and I wanted to have American clients. My idea was earn in dollars, spend in Filipino pesos. So at that point, it was very obvious what the biggest problem is. If my target is American clients, the biggest problem, I had a big network in the Philippines, having studied in UP, I knew UP alumni, you know. But if I wanted American clients, I needed I needed them to know that I exist.
Yeah.
So it was just super clear to me that that was the problem. And I'm like, okay, what is the easiest and fastest way to let people know I exist? And I'm like, okay, if I reach out to 100 people directly, telling them I can solve their problems with my business, surely at least one person would like buy my services. That was my idea, and I called it Project 100.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it worked. Let's talk about it another time about the business. But since that time, I've always done this Project 100 thing whenever I wanted to do something new, whether that's change careers. For example, when I wanted to get into tech, I reach out to 100 people in tech, just telling them, here's who I am. That's what you do. Want to learn what you do? Can you give me advice? So whether that's change careers, start a business, write a book,
Mm-hmm.
become an professional wrestler, which everything I did. I've always, the first step has always been to reach out to 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
So when I decided to move to Germany, that's also the first thing I did. I made a list of 100 people, and it was like 20 UP people, 20 Filipinos working in tech in Hamburg and Berlin, 20 tech people in Hamburg and Berlin, even if they're not Filipinos, 20 founders of companies uh, that are working in Germany, 20 former colleagues and bosses, even if they didn't work in Germany. So my idea was like, okay, the biggest problem is no one knows I exist. Let me make sure at least 100 people know I am exist and that I wanted to move to Germany. And actually it worked. Uh, so it was like uh, every day for the next 5 weeks, I reach out to like I think it was like 20 people per week for 5 weeks. So if it's 20 people per week, that's like 4 people per day that I would reach out, and like two of them would agree to get on a call.
Mm-hmm.
So in the end, to cut this long story short, I ended up doing at least 30 calls, 2 to 3 a day for 3 weeks, eight of which referred me to opening positions. So I did eight first interviews within a span of 2 weeks, which, if you have tried job searching in Germany, is very unusual. Most people, a lot of my clients come to me because they've been applying to 500 jobs for the last 6 months and got zero interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I did eight first interviews, failed four of them, but passed, like, got to four of them got into case studies and further interviews. And 2 months later, I have two offers. So yeah, within 2 months, I accepted a job offer.
Yeah.
Now I have a business teaching people how to. apply this in their life.
Right, right. So basically, Project 100 is about reaching to to 100 people in your network, right? And letting them know that you exist, that you're looking for a job, and so on.
Yes.
So, um,
Not only your network, but
but
i-
also outside, yeah.
building your network.
Building a
Because the
network.
biggest problem is you don't know anyone in Germany.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this strategy, it worked for you during the time that you were searching in 2019. But right now, what I hear from people is that the job market is quite tough. So, what other tips would you give to help an immigrant or an aspiring migrant to stand out in this tough job market?
Yes, that is a very good question, and it is true. Like Tin, when you and I moved, we didn't know it at that time, but we were very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were so many openings in Europe, funding was very abundant, and there weren't a lot of people, in the job market. But today it's extremely hard. So many layoffs. So there's a flood of talent in the market. There's zero, almost, well, not almost zero funding, but very little funding compared to 5 years ago. So no, not a lot of people are hiring. And then it's also become more popular that, it's a possibility to move to Europe. So all of these combined makes it a much harder job market. Yeah, so how to do this now when it's harder? Three things that I've found work for my clients. Number one, networking is still absolutely the most important thing because it's typical these days that when someone opens a job opening, like 1,000 people apply. And then like 10 or 20 people get invited to a first interview. So just mathematically, the odds of you getting picked through a cold application is like 1%. For context, Harvard's acceptance rate is 5%. So your odds of getting into Harvard are higher than like getting an interview from a cold application. Anyway, networking and referrals still the most important thing.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, figuring out your unique value proposition, like what makes you different as a product manager, as a recruiter, as an English teacher, whatever, from the 100 other people is extremely important. It's kind of hard to do this, so I don't have time to do this now in this webinar, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share like how to do this, but like figuring out what's unique about you, extremely important. Don't skip it. And then the final thing is like what I call a value one pager, which is a one pager that you create uh to kind of like a proactive proposal to solve one of the problems an employer is hiring for. So, for example, since Thea is doing English teaching, so maybe someone is hiring, English teachers here, and like one of the job description is like, uh, teach people who have zero English, and like you create a one pager to say like, okay, here are the four strategies that are the most important in teaching English to someone starting from zero. So it would be like a table of three columns, like strategy, how I've made it work, and how I imagine I could make it work in company X. And then you include this in your applications. And the whole goal is to show, not tell, that you know what the fuck you're talking about. Because a lot of candidates are out there making claims like, I can do this, I can do that, I've done that, but where is the proof? This one pager is your proof, and it's one way to stand out.